Hello, this is the City Builders. I am Mark Nickita,
And I am Dorian Moore. We're partners in Archive DS.
and we are sitting here in Capitol Park in downtown Detroit. And we thought we'd talk a little bit, just for a few minutes, about the state of downtowns in medium to larger cities throughout North America as we've seen them evolving in recent years and establishing sort of a new paradigm in the post-COVID, post-pandemic world that we now live in. So we wanted to talk a little bit about observations and thoughts, potential concerns, positives, and where we might go or where the future may hold for cities of larger size.
So there are basically three areas that are of primary concern as cities, shape themselves for the future. There's the office, residential, and retail markets, and how cities need to respond to each of these is going to be critical as they move forward. As we know, many people are working from home, and that's causing a lack of or a lessening of activity in our downtown cores. So what do cities need to do to brace themselves for the future and to be successful in this new paradigm? That's the key question, and that's what we'd like to talk about today.
And it's interesting because I think depending on how, going back to the work from home idea, work from home is changing a lot of the dynamic. Of course, the amount of people that are home and working, and then where they go out midday or earlier afternoon, and whether they drive or take transit or get to work, all of that becomes a changing factor. But really, in a downtown environment, work from home actually can be a positive, depending on how many people live in the downtown environment or the downtown district. So your sort of success of activity in terms of retail or activity on the street or the sort of vibrancy of a place has a lot to do with the amount of mix or office versus residential that you have. And that's an interesting reality of whether or not you're seeing a downtown seem healthier or not so healthy going into the post-pandemic world. So I think that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. But the reality is that if you're completely office-oriented with very little residential, then you're in much more of a concerning circumstance than if you had a better mix to begin with. And I think that's something that we're observing in a lot of cities that we're seeing going forward.
And it seems that the cities that are able to look at downtown as its own neighborhood, as opposed to, quote unquote, the central business district, those cities are preparing themselves for the future. With people working from home, making being in the downtown an attractive neighborhood option is going to be critical and bring downtowns into the realm of providing the services that people living downtown need. That's one of the ways to address this. But prior to COVID, there was a lot of emphasis on certain demographics moving back to the downtowns. And so we can take advantage of this by making it more attractive, making it more service oriented, and basically broadening what it means to be a downtown.
It's interesting. We spend a lot of time we go to a lot of different cities and identify and observe what's been going on in their particular areas. But we spend a lot of time in downtown Detroit, where we're at now, in downtown Toronto, where we have our other locations. So if you think about those downtowns in terms of what we see on a daily basis, in our office is just a couple blocks from here in Capitol Park. And throughout COVID, we were working for the most part at our office most days of the week. And we were observing, I think, through a lot of that, and surely now, that the activity level was still reasonably high. I mean, I think that was something I had a lot of people asking me. Do you see a real change downtown? How has it been? How has it evolved? Is it really dead? Have we lost a lot of restaurants or retail or whatever? And I think in general, my answer has been not really. Actually, we've seen a lot of activity during the middle of the day. A lot of the restaurants and a lot of the cafes have stayed open. I'm sure a number of them have struggled, of course, during the deeper challenges of the period. But for the most part, I don't think we lost a whole lot of restaurants and activity in the retail area. And one of the things I think we noticed a lot of, we kind of commented about a number of times, the amount of people walking their dogs or sitting outside working on their laptops middle of the day, on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. And we would sit here here in Capitol Park, for example, or some of the other public spaces, and see people working, from home, but they're actually working in the street. They're working in the parks, in the public spaces, and that was a whole different dynamic. Where people walking their dogs midday because they want to take a break from their work, and okay, 11, 12 o'clock, they take a break, go for a little walk, maybe grab a bite, take their dogs. It's a whole different dynamic. So you saw kind of a neighborhood environment evolving instead of just a sort of a workforce.
Right. And it's important to think about the pronouncements during COVID that downtowns and cities were going to die because people were going to move out of them. We've seen the exact opposite. We've seen that, yes, we've lost office workers, but we've also gained residents. We've also gained the things that need to respond to an increase in residential in our downtown cores. The need for cafes, restaurants, and services. But also, on top of that, an increased need for public space. And we saw a lot of temporary public space created in the streets, but also attention has been turned to public spaces like the one that we're in now, Capitol Park. That these kind of spaces that were probably taken for granted pre-COVID are now seen as kind of the primary spaces in these downtown cores. And so they're going to receive much more attention, and as people start to embrace them more and more as places to work and recreate, I think we're going to see a lot more investment in public space, and at all scales. So this is kind of a moderately scaled space, but we're going to see some of the larger parks in urban downtowns with investment, and also some of the smaller, what you might call pocket parks, or pocket plazas in these downtowns will also get attention. I think public space is going to be a big benefit from the emphasis on living downtown and working downtown from home.
Yeah, it's changed the dynamic, and as with any of these kinds of things, you don't really know where it's all going to end up and how it'll evolve, because we can predict all we want, but ultimately there's all kinds of unforeseen sort of realities that start to come together as things sort of settle one way or another. I think like you said, the public space importance has increased. The need and the value of public space is really it's sort of a new perspective that not only residents and workers have, but also the city leadership has had. I think that the idea that cities have embraced the idea or the concept of increasing public space and looking for opportunities where they may have overlooked or not thought about them before, I think is another part of the evolution. And so we're going to see that change. The other element of that, and you mentioned recreation, but I think you carry it forward. Activity, people being outside, people walking more, and people riding more bikes. Yes. I think that the other thing we saw during COVID was people, of course, being concerned to be in close areas, being on buses, being on subways, being in transit, and other things. Obviously, through COVID, being concerned about where they may or may not be safe from the obviously the COVID situation. So people chose to do other things. More people walking, more people chose to ride their bikes. And some cities, as we've seen, surely here in Detroit, I think we've seen an increase in bike activity, but also in Toronto and other cities, people really embracing the bike as a means to get around. And I think in the beginning, part of COVID was doing it out of necessity. But I think getting comfortable with that idea, comfortable with the concept of taking a bike to the store to get groceries, or taking the bike to visit a friend or something like that instead of transit or instead of driving a car or whatever. I think that has really become another transformative element that we're going to see sort of evolve. I know that a number of cities, and as we've seen, they've really increased the bike infrastructure, uh, elements, whether it be places to park bikes, bike racks, things like that, but as well non-motorized pathway systems, designated bike sharing's increased as well. So I think there's been a whole other dynamic that's come out of that deals with how cities or downtowns are evolving with the use of this alternative transportation emphasis. Really is kind of evolving too.
Right, and so that, just to pick up on that kind of leads me to this idea of alternative transportation. But where are you going? And again, I come back to the amenities that are part of now living downtown, and the current state of retail and what retail in the new downtown is going to look like. And as we've traveled across the country, we've seen more and more situations where retail is tending towards smaller spaces and towards less of an emphasis on sort of the chain retail and more emphasis on local in the cities and downtowns that are adapting and surviving. Now, there are big cities that are still clinging to the old chain store model, and they're struggling just because you're trying to fill up large spaces as opposed to smaller spaces that can be inhabited by startups and entrepreneurs. It's a challenge. And so we're seeing, and Detroit is a good example of where smaller spaces are being used and people are being successful. And so we probably should look at that a lot more in a lot of other cities.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen, a transformation as far as chains or nationals, as they call it, to the independent. And I think opportunities for independents to evolve will also changed. And there's been obviously a lot of challenges with COVID and with businesses surviving through the challenging times of the couple of years there.
Please hit the like button, subscribe,
and share the channel with friends and colleagues. So it's been a mix-up, and I think one of the challenges has been with national chains and their requirements. National chains tend to have a requirement for size and the way that they run. A lot of them have prototypes. They only fit in a certain size. They don't have the flexibility oftentimes as an independent does. Independents can really adjust a lot more because they don't have the sort of infrastructure or the sort of concept that they're adhering to. So I think that cities being more organic, more atypical, that needs some users that accommodate for the unique circumstances. I mean, we sit here and in a place that has a whole series of buildings that are 100 years old, and of course, a building that's been around for 100 years has changed a lot of times, and their users have changed many times over. Well, if they always adhere to a sort of a standard that this office space can only be this big, or I only need this, or I need that, we would never see these buildings survive, right? Because they need users that have flexibility. Well, chains and nationals have a tendency to be less flexible. So really, an environment like this really almost sets itself up for independence. And independents, I think, tend to find these kinds of environments really much easier to participate in and be part of. Now, within a couple blocks of us, there are chains.
Right.
We have a number of chain stores within the urban context, but mostly the independents have found their way, to work in this kind of environment. And I think that when you look at what that is, the size of spaces, the articulation of the space, whether it's too long or wide or whatever it is, that flexibility needs to be part of the user's um, sort of capacity and ability to accommodate, and that's where they fit together well.
Right. And I think one of the things that I think we need to be clear on, and you touched on it, is the location of the larger chains versus the smaller entrepreneurial and startup type spaces, and understanding that there can be in the new formation of the downtown discrete areas where you have smaller scale retail, like here we are in Capitol Park, where it's ideal for this smaller scale retail commercial environment. Whereas on a main street in a big city, like in Detroit on Woodward Avenue, it's probably more appropriate to have these larger chain-oriented functions. And one of the things that I think is important moving forward is that we take a very strategic approach to where things are located in cities so that they can be the most successful, as opposed to just letting things happen by happenstance. I think there needs to be a concentrated effort in understanding where certain businesses are going to thrive versus others. And that's something that's not talked about as much, but that's something I think that we should start really thinking about and acting on as cities start to move forward.
That happens naturally as well, because obviously where there's food places, and other food places oftentimes want to be nearby, and then there's that synergy that happens, and we've seen that historically as well. So yeah, that's going to change, I think, and evolve further from where it's been in the past too, going into the future. But again, we don't always we're not here to predict the future, is to observe what we see.
Right.
And I think one of the other things that of course we didn't touch on too much is the transformation in office. And I guess that's probably its own discussion altogether at another time. But I think to touch on the fact that, again, older buildings or older districts or cities that have a mix of new and old, have typically a variety of different buildings, and with the office market being kind of in flux right now, seriously in flux actually, where are we going to go with that, and what are we seeing? I mean, I think that there will continue to be clearly an office need in a lot of urban districts and downtowns. It'll continue. We're not going to see that go away completely. I think the evolution is clearly upon us. So we're seeing, work from home. We're seeing partial work weeks. We're seeing changes in the needs with companies and what they have and all that. But I think that the other thing is the flexibility. Going back to flexibility, the flexibility of office buildings or buildings where offices are in currently. We're going to see a number of different opportunities and changes, I think, as we go on. We don't really know what those are yet. But I think that depending on the size of the buildings and the square footprint of the building, that has a lot to do with whether or not we're going to see some mixed use or some flexibility or some real challenges for certain buildings to become something else going forward, whether it's office to residential or office to something else or office to some other type of office. I mean, I think that footprints are really critical.
Right. The other thing that is going to be important is the uses on the first floors. I think in some locations we are seeing office move to the first floor. And what does that mean for the walkability, the activity on the street? How do you incorporate those situations? Because even though we're seeing retail demand, it's how strong is that demand, and will we be able to fill up all the previously existing and leased out retail space at the ground level? And if we can't, how do we treat that ground level so that it contributes to the urban environment as opposed to being a detriment towards it. That's something that I think we're really keen on taking a look at, is how does that pedestrian realm, that first 2 floors of a building still contribute to the urban environment in this new downtown dynamic.
Yeah, but I mean, that's something that's been going on for years, and I think that the key thing in zoning in a downtown district is identifying. I mean, I think to your point, which we've been seeing for a long time, offices that want to be on the first floor for whatever reason. In some cases, there's a lot of reasons. It could be cost related, it could be location, it could be whatever the capacity of the building is. Even the use of the office, and there's a lot of reasons why an office would want to be on the first floor, or why a landlord would want to have an office on the first floor. But the reality is that there's a very important sort of, outcome of whether it's on the first floor or whether it isn't, because it really relates to where it is in the city,
exactly.
as you mentioned. And I think that's a key and critical point. But through zoning, you can identify that some areas are better served to have office on the first floor. In other areas, it's highly detrimental to have office on the first floor. And I think you have to designate it where you want those. We often call those A streets, B streets, C streets, or a particular line that we want to hold as a retail district or retail area. And I think that's going to evolve a bit too as the sort of post-COVID world comes. But ultimately, you have to define. I mean, the dictator really is, where do you want it to be highly pedestrian oriented, and where you want to be sort of lesser pedestrian oriented, where it is not as important, not needed.
Right.
And that can be achieved through zoning, which we know that's done successfully in some cities, and then in other cities where they don't have that identified, it can be highly detrimental, and it's very problematic to have office use on the first floor in very active areas. So that's a whole other change that might come out of the office demand, the availability of space, landlords and building owners who really are aggressive about trying to fill their space, and cities where they want to identify certain zoning to identify what areas might take on a certain character or not. And I think those are all questions that, just like when we always talk about how planning and zoning will lead to an outcome that we are hoping for. One of the things we always talk about is that we can't magically hope that things will just happen the way we would like them to happen. You have to guide it and direct it, and that's when we get involved in zoning to identify particular things that will be the basis to achieve a goal or a type of outcome that we think is beneficial to the city. That can be done, but you have to have the understanding of what you want and the wherewithal and the political will, if you will, to carry it forward. That's always difficult, but that's one of the things we have a lot of experience in doing. Not only from the standpoint of city leadership, but from the standpoint of master planning and urban design and architectural implementation.
And that brings me to one last thing that I want to make sure we think about is, as these downtowns redefine themselves, we're going to be seeing more and more infill structures coming online. And again, the issue is how much retail, and how do we treat that ground floor, and how do you do fully residential buildings in a downtown setting and have them contribute to the vibrancy of the street in a different way, but a complementary way to what retail has traditionally done, if we're not going to have the same level of demand in the downtown. So that's something we have to think of also, and that's something we're looking at as we study different cities on our tours. We have to keep that in mind also.
We've seen a lot of successful situations, and we've planned those kinds of environments, which actually have worked out well. But you have to be clear about what the goal is for a particular street or district or whatever, you know, and then identify the planning and the zoning and then the implementation of the architecture to achieve that goal, which is all doable, but not always done,
Right.
and not always done well. So,
Yeah.
anyway, I think that covers pretty much an overview, a quick overview for observations and things we've seen and things we're thinking may be important to consider as we build our downtowns.
And so with that, we'll sign off until the next time. And as we always say, walk the streets.